Welcome back. It's Christopher, and in today's episode, I'm looking at hikers who didn't make it out alive because of one small mistake. From a confident trail coach who believed he knew how to scare off a bear to another who ignored his own advice and ran straight into danger. But first, we start with a couple who believed they were making the right decision until it put them exactly where they shouldn't have been. It was September 17th, 2016, northwestern Montana. Black Rock Canyon Trail cuts through dense forested canyon country known for grizzly bear activity. Trees pressed in on both sides, and the creek bed below the embankment kept visibility short in every direction. Daniel Forsyth was 46. He worked as a civil engineer. Friends described him as someone who was hard to reason with once he had made up his mind. He had been hiking for over 2 decades and believed he knew how to handle himself in the backcountry. He had the gear and the experience, and he trusted both completely. Ruth Forsyth was 44. She worked as a primary school teacher. She had been married to Daniel for 18 years, and the last 14 months had been the hardest. They had stopped talking the way they used to. Small disagreements dragged on longer than they should. Daniel had pulled away from her, and the more she tried to close the distance, the further he went. She had started to wonder whether what they had could still be saved. The trip was her idea. She suggested the trail, and he agreed almost before she finished asking, faster than he had agreed to anything in over a year. That yes meant something to her. They had met on this trail 19 years earlier and got engaged a year after that at a spot just past mile marker 6, where the canyon opened up and the view down the creek stayed with you. They had come back 11 times since. I think about that a lot. She was trying to save her marriage, and that was the trail she picked. The advisory board at the trailhead was clear. Multiple grizzly bears had been confirmed active between mile markers 6 and 9. Feeding had been observed along the creek corridor below mile marker 6, where bears had been drawn to a seasonal food source in that drainage. Hikers were told to turn back at mile marker 5. The warning was current and written in plain language. Daniel read it. Ruth stood beside him and watched him do it. When he finished, she told him it said to turn back at 5. He said they had done this trail 11 times and nothing had ever happened. He had his bear spray. The place they were going was past 6, right where the canyon opened up, the exact spot where he had proposed. He wanted to get there. Ruth told him again the warning was specific. He was already walking. She had not pushed back on him in a long time, and this did not feel like the moment to start. She followed. They crossed mile marker 5 at 9:25 in the morning. The trail got narrower and the brush got thicker on both sides. The creek ran below a short embankment to their left, and the vegetation cut visibility down to just a few meters. The sounds of the canyon, birds and water and wind, faded out in the stretch between the embankment and the tree line above the trail. Neither of them noticed. Daniel caught his foot on a root and glanced down for a moment. What they could not see was that 2 adult bears had been moving through the same creek feeding corridor independently, one working below the embankment to their left and one somewhere in the tree line to the right. The trail ran straight through the middle of that corridor. By the time they entered that stretch, there was no safe distance left in any direction. The bear from the embankment came up fast and hit Daniel from the left side. The force knocked him off the trail and onto the ground. The bear was on him immediately, biting hard into his upper back and neck. Ruth heard him go down and spun toward the sound. She stumbled to the right side of the trail, screaming and calling his name, trying to see him through the brush. That movement and that noise reached the second bear before she did. It had been feeding in the tree line above the trail, and her sudden lateral movement toward it closed the distance faster than either of them could have registered. She got the bear spray up, but she was off balance and pointing the wrong way. The spray went out at the wrong angle and did not build up where it needed to before the bear reached her. It bit into her upper back and neck. She went down and did not get up. The trail went quiet again after. Rangers started a search when the couple did not come back when expected, and their car was still at the trailhead after dark. The search team crossed mile marker 5 and found Daniel and Ruth Forsyth on the trail beyond the advisory boundary. The medical examiner recorded the cause of death for both as traumatic injuries to the neck and upper spine from animal attack with associated blood loss. They were 46 and 44 years old. Post-incident findings confirmed the advisory had been accurate and specific at the time they entered the trail. Both names were in the trailhead register signed after the board had been read. The bear spray had been discharged, but the angle and distance at the time of use meant it never reached effective concentration before contact. Tracks from 2 adult grizzly bears were identified, and the disturbance patterns were consistent with separate approach directions along the same feeding corridor. No immediate removal action was deemed necessary. If you think that was devastating, the next case I looked into is different in almost every way except the outcome. A man alone on a trail he had run 60 times. He knew the rules, but one mistake cost him everything. It was the 16th of July, 2019. Flathead National Forest, northern Montana, a trail running route through mixed forest that Kevin Marsh had used roughly 60 times. He knew where it turned, where it dipped, where the light changed through the canopy. He knew it the way you know a road you drive every week without thinking about it anymore. Kevin Marsh was 38. He worked as a trail running coach and had built a modest following through his writing. One of his most read pieces was titled Bear Country Running: How to Stay Safe. It had picked up around 4,000 views. The guidance in it was sound. Make regular vocal noise on the trail. Slow your pace near blind corners and water crossings. Do not wear headphones in known bear corridors. He had written all of it from experience, and he believed it. He wrote the guide. He believed every word of it. That morning, he put his headphones in anyway. I understand why. The week had been difficult, and he needed the distance. But the forest did not care about his week. Tuesday was his long run day. He had been dealing with a difficult week. A scheduling dispute with a client had been going back and forth for several days, and that morning it had escalated into something that was still unresolved when he pulled into the trailhead car park. He sat in the car for a few minutes before getting out. He put his headphones in before he started running. He had not worn them on this trail before. He started at full pace. The trail passed through 2 creek crossings. Both sat inside documented high activity zones, one near a berry patch at mile 4, the other further along where the trail dipped toward the water and the vegetation closed in on both sides. These were the kinds of spots he had written about specifically. The creek noise covered approach sounds. The terrain cut sightlines to a few meters. Anyone moving fast and not making noise was invisible to the environment, and the environment was invisible to them. He passed the first creek without incident. The music was playing. His pace was steady. Somewhere near mile 4, a disturbance moved through the brush ahead of him, a brief shift. In the vegetation, then stillness. He did not register it. He kept running. The second creek crossing came up the way it always did. The trail curved left and dropped slightly before opening onto the bank. He had run this section dozens of times in every season. His pace did not change as he came around the curve. The grizzly was at the waterline with its head down, feeding. The bear may have been aware of something approaching, but not enough to identify it as a threat before the distance collapsed. The creek covered the sound of his footsteps, and the headphones covered Kevin's ears. By the time either of them had any awareness of the other, Kevin was already within roughly 10 meters and still moving at running pace. At that distance, a startled grizzly does not have time to assess, and neither does a person. The response was immediate, and there was no interval between detection and contact in which any of the options Kevin had written about could have been applied. The grizzly made contact before Kevin had fully processed what was in front of him. The force of the initial strike knocked him off the trail. The bear bit into his upper back and shoulder, and the weight behind it drove him to the ground. He had no footing to push back from, and no distance or time to draw and deploy the spray on his belt. The bear held the bite. The injuries to the upper back and neck region were immediately incapacitating. He did not get up. Kevin Marsh did not complete the run. His vehicle remained at the trailhead through the afternoon. When he did not return by early evening, someone raised the alarm and a search was initiated. The team followed his usual route into the forest. They found him near the second creek crossing. He was 38 years old. The cause of death was consistent with a grizzly bear encounter at close range. The investigation noted that the trail passed through a documented high-activity zone, that the creek crossing limited sound and visibility, and that Kevin had been running at full pace without making noise and with headphones in at the time of the encounter. His blog post remained online. The comments stayed open. People continued to find it through search. I have covered similar cases like that of Kelvin. You can check the channel later. The next one I looked into is harder to explain because the man at the center of it had never needed to follow the rules before. It was August 3rd, 2015, Route National Forest, Colorado, a dispersed backcountry campsite in mixed forest terrain known for black bear activity. The kind of site experienced campers find without much effort, quiet, off the main routes. The sort of place that feels familiar the moment you set up. Gary Tipton was 45. He worked as a high school geography teacher in Pueblo, Colorado. He had been car camping for years and had completed 40 trips across 11 states before this one. He had never used proper food storage methods on any of them. No bear hang, no bear box. No separation between food and sleeping area. Nothing had ever happened. 40 trips and not a single problem. That record was the most important thing he carried into every campsite. 11 states, not one problem. I want to be honest. If I had that record, I might start to think the same way he did. That is what makes this case so easy to understand and so difficult to watch unfold. This campsite had a bear box. It was a 10-minute walk from where he pitched his tent. He noted it when he arrived and did not use it. He cooked bacon at 6 in the evening. The high-fat cooking residue moved through the trees the way it does, heavy and far-reaching. He cooked again at 10 at night, a late meal before bed. He left the residue on the stove where it sat. Before he got into his sleeping bag, he applied scented lip balm and placed his food bag in the tent vestibule, the covered outer section of the tent, separated from where he was sleeping by a single layer of tent fabric. His hiking partner was camped roughly 30 meters away. The partner had hung their food using a proper PCT hang, suspending it well away from the sleeping area with no food odors left near the tent. The two camps sat in the same forest that night under different conditions. Bears navigate by scent. They can detect food odors across distances that would surprise most people, and they move toward the strongest source with focus and consistency. What Gary had built over the course of that evening was a layered scent trail pointing in a single direction, high-fat cooking residue twice over, grease on the stove, an unsecured food bag at the entrance to his tent, separated from him by fabric alone, scented product applied directly to his face. Each element on its own would have been enough to draw interest. Together, they created a continuous gradient pointing straight at where he was sleeping. The bear entered the campsite sometime in the night following that gradient. It did not remain at the partner's hang. There was nothing there to compete with the stronger source nearby. It continued along the scent trail until it reached Gary's tent. It pushed into the vestibule and began pulling at the food bag. The noise woke Gary. He moved inside the tent, disoriented and in the dark. And as the bear breached the vestibule, the barrier between them collapsed into immediate contact. The bear reacted to the sudden presence with a short defensive burst, biting into his face and upper chest and swiping hard before disengaging. The contact lasted only a few seconds, but the injuries to his face, neck, and chest were severe. The noise brought other campers out of their sleep. They emerged from their tents shouting and banging whatever they could find, moving toward Gary's campsite with torches. The bear registered the disturbance and moved back into the tree line. The campers reached Gary and found him on the ground outside the torn tent, bleeding heavily from his face, neck, and chest. They applied pressure to the wounds and tried to keep him still. He was conscious for a short time, enough to register that people were with him, and then lost consciousness before he could give a clear response. His condition deteriorated steadily from that point. The injuries were too extensive, and the bleeding too heavy for field treatment to hold. Someone called emergency services. The campsite was remote, and the hour was late, and it took time for paramedics to reach them. When they arrived, they worked on Gary at the scene, but he had already succumbed to his injuries before evacuation could begin. Gary Tipton was pronounced dead at the campsite. The cause of death was recorded as severe traumatic injuries and blood loss consistent with a bear attack at close range inside a tent. Post-incident findings confirmed the food storage guidelines had not been followed, despite a bear box being available at the site. Evening had created a concentrated scent environment at the sleeping location. The partner's use of proper food hang protocols was noted in the review. The bear had followed the only thing that had been made consistent. The partner 30 meters away followed the protocols. The bear walked straight past their camp. Gary's record of 40 trips without incident ended on trip 41. That breaks my heart. I was almost about to wrap up this list, but then I came across Philip's case, and I could not leave it out, because unlike everyone before him, he did everything right up until the moment his own body betrayed him. It was the 18th of June, 2017. Bridger Teton National Forest, Wyoming. Open alpine terrain, broken up by patches of mixed forest and brush. Grizzly bear country. The kind of landscape where you can see a long way in some directions, and nothing at all in others, depending on where the vegetation closes in. Philip Crane was 43. He worked as a high school science teacher in Casper. He had been hiking recreationally for years and had recently completed a wilderness safety course that included bear encounter protocols. He had come away from it confident and well prepared, or at least that was how it felt. He was leading a small group that day and had explained bear behavior at the trailhead before they set out. Let me be fair here. He had just completed a wilderness safety course, but what the course could not prepare him for was what his own body would do in the half second after the first charge stopped. The bear appeared at a distance, open stretch of trail, and began moving toward them. Philip told the group to hold, and they held. The bear came fast, closing the gap in a rush, then stopped somewhere in the range of 10 to 20 meters out. It looked like a bluff charge, close enough to what he had read about that he held his position and did not run. The first phase had gone roughly the way the training described. Not perfectly, but close. Enough that he was still standing. Then the tension broke. The adrenaline that had been building through the charge released all at once, and something involuntary came out of him. A short, sharp sound, somewhere between a shout and a laugh. The kind of thing a body produces when it has been braced for impact, and the impact does not arrive. It lasted less than a second. He had not chosen to make it. The bear was already highly aroused from the charge, already at close range, already in the middle of an assessment that had not been resolved. The vocalization may have contributed to what followed, but the bear was already operating at a level of stress and proximity where very little was needed to tip the interaction. What caused the second charge to begin cannot be stated with certainty. What is clear is that it followed almost immediately. The distance was already gone. The bear came to the remaining ground without stopping. The group behind Philip broke and ran when the second charge began. The bear remained fixed on Philip at the closest point. Philip was the nearest target, and the bear reached him. The bear hit Philip and drove him to the ground. It bit into his upper back and shoulder, and the force was immediate and significant. He tried to cover his neck with his arms, but the bear's weight pinned him, and the biting continued across his back and the back of his head before the bear disengaged and moved off. Philip lay on the ground and did not get up. The rest of the group reached the trailhead and reported the encounter. A search response was initiated, and a team followed the trail back into the area. Philip Crane was located near the encounter site. He was alive but severely injured, with deep lacerations and bite wounds across his upper back, shoulders, and the back of his head. He was airlifted to hospital, where he underwent surgery. He survived, but sustained permanent damage to his shoulder and partial hearing loss on one side from the head injuries. Post-incident review noted that Philip had followed correct bear encounter protocol through the first charge. The involuntary vocalization at close range during the assessment phase was identified as a possible contributing factor to the escalation, but reviewers noted the bear had already been in a highly aroused state at reduced distance, and that the interaction may have escalated regardless. The review noted that the group breaking and running during the second charge did not redirect the bear. No fault was identified with the trail operation or the terrain. The bear was not located for removal assessment. The plan accounted for behavior. Philip survived because the bear disengaged. The last case I want to cover today did not end that way. 2 hikers. Correct protocol from the first second. Bear spray deployed at the right moment. A ranger already in the canyon. And it still was not enough for one of them. It was September 16, 2018. Gallatin National Forest, Montana. A canyon. Trail running through dense brush with rock walls rising on both sides. The terrain funneled movement in one direction and limited visibility to a short stretch ahead. Sound carried differently in the canyon depending on the wind. It was a known grizzly bear country, and both hikers knew that before they started. Aaron Whitfield was 39. He worked as a structural engineer for a firm in Bozeman and had been hiking seriously since his early 20s. He had introduced Jess to trail hiking not long after they met, and over the years she had grown comfortable on most terrain, though she still deferred to him on route decisions and gear. They had been married for 11 years. Their youngest daughter had just left for boarding school the previous month, the last of their children to go, and the house had been quieter than either of them had expected. The trip had been Aaron's suggestion, just the two of them, the way things had been before the children came. Jess had agreed without hesitation. Their youngest had just left for boarding school. The house was quiet for the first time in years. Aaron suggested the trip, and Jess agreed without hesitation. I keep thinking about how normal that sounds, how ordinary the reason for going was. Jess Whitfield was also 39. She worked as a practice manager at a dental clinic in Bozeman. Hiking was not something she had grown up with. Aaron had brought her into it gradually, and she had come to enjoy it, particularly the longer canyon routes, where the terrain felt dramatic without being technical. She trusted his judgment on the trail the way she trusted it most places. They had come prepared. Bear spray was clipped to both hip holsters with the safety tabs already removed. They were moving at a controlled pace and making regular noise as they walked. Everything about their approach to the trail was correct. The grizzly appeared ahead of them at roughly 60 meters. Both hikers stopped immediately. They stood together, spoke in calm, steady voices, and held the spray at low ready. The bear was watching them and beginning to close the distance slowly. They held their position and kept talking. The bear continued to approach. As the distance came down to around 30 meters, Aaron shifted slightly forward. The adjustment placed him closer to the bear than Jess. He was now the nearest point of contact. The bear closed the remaining distance rapidly. Aaron deployed the spray. The cloud caught the edge of the approach and disrupted the bear's focus, but not enough to stop the charge at that distance. The bear reached Aaron. It bit into his upper back and neck and pinned him under its weight, maintaining contact through repeated force. The injuries were severe and rapidly incapacitating. A ranger already in the canyon corridor, moving through the trail system after recent bear activity reports in the area, changed direction when human voices shifted from routine noise to distress. Coming into a position. With sightlines to the trail, the ranger deployed bear spray from a distance that allowed the cloud to form fully. The secondary spray cloud reached effective concentration across the trail before the bear could re-engage with Jess. The bear disengaged and redirected away from her and out of the immediate area. The ranger got on the radio immediately and called for additional personnel and emergency medical response. Jess was kept back while the ranger moved toward Aaron. He was on the ground in the encounter zone, unresponsive, with severe injuries to his neck and upper back. The ranger attempted to control the bleeding as best as the injury location allowed and maintained that until additional personnel arrived. Paramedics were dispatched, but the canyon location added time to the response. By the time medical support reached the scene, Aaron Whitfield had lost too much blood. He was pronounced dead at the site. He was 39 years old. Jess was uninjured. Post-incident review noted that both hikers had followed correct bear encounter protocol from the initial sighting.